Welcome to Trading the Close on this Monday. I'm Toni Valliere with Verified Investing. Here's what's making headlines today. Shares of Boeing tumble after a panel blew out of an Alaska Airlines 737-9 MAX mid-flight, leading to the grounding of 171 of those planes. Radio and podcast giant Odyssey files for bankruptcy protection following plummeting ad sales. Johnson & Johnson says it will acquire cancer drug developer Ambrx Biopharma for $2 billion, the goal of transforming the treatment of cancer. Tiger Woods ends his partnership with Nike after 27 years. No word on why, but he reportedly made more than $500 million in that partnership. And Bitcoin pushes past 46,000 and is taking over social media feeds as investors await an ETF decision. Let's take a look at where things stand right now. Just minutes before the close, we are seeing a boom here, a big rally. The Russell up 34, NASDAQ up 314, the Dow up 209 points, and the S&P 500 up 64 points. Just before the closing bell, we have Chief Market Strategist and Master Trader Gareth Soloway. What's going on? This big boom close to the close.
Yeah, amazing. So last week it was almost every day was down. People were starting to get a little nervous. And today the up move basically wipes out a majority of that downside. NASDAQ's up over 2%. Even the Dow's up almost 0.6%. That's with Boeing probably contributing a negative 150 points to it. And the S&P 1.4%, just monstrous gains. So again, what we saw here was we were running into resistance into year end. It was nonstop upside. We saw that little bit of a pullback, and then look at the size of that candle today, just negating basically 3 down days of last week. We're not back to the highs, but we're really close. And I think this goes back to something that I talked about, which is you have these former pivot points, right? So if we look at the chart, we have this area right here. We had the breakout. So what I said last week was as long as you don't violate this area, right? If we draw a trend line across here, as long as you don't get below this area down here, the market honestly is just a simple pullback. It shouldn't be concerning. It shouldn't be worrying to anyone. This is just a simple pullback over an overbought scenario, which is natural. People took profits at the beginning of the year. They didn't want to take those taxes in the end of last year, so they took them last week. And then the markets are back to their bullish case. And part of that, too, is NVIDIA announcing a new chip. I mean, NVIDIA is just having a monstrous day today. Let's, in fact, take a quick look at that here. And you can see, again, NVIDIA, $522, and I think this is a move of over 6%. One thing I have on this chart that's kind of a cool thing to keep an eye on, and I think this means it probably has a little bit more upside before a potential pullback, but what we have here is we have a pivot point to a pivot point, and then that line is perfectly parallel with these lines down here, and there's one off screen as well. And that level takes us into the 530 to 35 range right up there. So I'd expect potentially a little bit more upside before it starts running into some resistance. But yeah, this market's incredible. It's risk on today. It's as if nothing happened last week. It's back to the same old upside.
All right, that was one of the big market movers today. Alaska Airlines, another one, and Boeing. What's the situation with them right now?
Yeah, let's take a look at Boeing here. So Boeing, again, guys, hammered today. But the one thing you could just notice here is this, if we look at the Boeing chart, this is today's down day. And look at this. Like just in the last couple weeks of the year, this thing shot up from, or this is actually the weekly chart. So in the last 6 to 8 weeks, we went straight up from $170 to $270. So even with today's pullback, we can see that we're only retracing a portion of that move. And obviously, it's scary news. Thank goodness no one was killed during that catastrophe there, that event. But still, kind of just looking at the chart, you don't look at this and say, oh my goodness, this stock is collapsing. It's just retracing this move, right? And in fact, you can see right here, kind of right in that same area right there. So I think for the most part on a chart basis, I wouldn't be necessarily going long, but at the same time, if you are long, I don't think you panic just yet. It's not like, again, we're breaking key levels. Like if we took out, like if you draw a trend line here, right? If we started to trade down here, that would be more concerning. Right now, it's just your run-of-your-mill pullback, even though the news is very negative.
Yeah, and affecting a few airlines as well, not just one. All right, we got to talk Bitcoin. If we can move on to that, of course, it's predicted that an ETF approval could happen by Wednesday. No guarantee. We're watching this closely. But what would a spot Bitcoin ETF mean for the average investor?
Yeah, that's a good question, right? So the ETF basically opens the door to a lot of regular investors that probably don't feel comfortable buying on exchanges. And we've heard about the horror stories, whether it was Sam Bankman-Fried and the fraud going on there, many situations of fraud. And also, we don't have FDIC insurance in crypto on the crypto exchanges. So, if you happen to get, phished for a password or all these other things and someone steals your money, there's no real repercussions, right? There's no way to get your money back. With the ETF, it allows people with stock accounts to get into something that tracks the spot market. So it does have the positives of that side. And the expectation is I think there's like 11 ETFs up for approval. That potentially could attract a lot of money. In fact, I heard BlackRock had $2 billion already lined up for their ETF. So again, makes sense, right? We have this parallel channel. Right now, we're piercing it. I want to see where we close today. But there is potential upside. And we said this last week and the week before, 48 to 50,000 is a real interesting level if it gets up there. Now, I do think...
Explain why.
So multiple reasons, right? So amazing stuff here. In fact, let's go and zoom out on the chart here, and I'm going to actually...
That's what I've been seeing on social media.
I know. And by the way, I want to be clear. One of the things that kind of... There's so much hype right now, and it bothers me that everyone's talking about that level. It means it's either going to blow through that level or it's not going to get there. It's one or the other, generally. I should say generally. Sometimes it does. But basically, if you take this level from 2019, right, and we connect it through the bull market lows, right up to about 48,000. There's actually multiple other pivot points here, but even the Fibonacci, if you do a Fibonacci retrace, the 618 level is right there as well at around 48 to 50,000. So there's a lot of confluence of factors at that level where it would be big resistance. So the question is, again, does it get there? But I will say this, in general, I do think a lot of the upside's been front-loaded, at least in the near term. Long term, this is a huge win for crypto, right, and Bitcoin. But in the near term, people have been loading the boat for this for the last multiple months. And so I do expect some sort of retrace once it occurs. I think you get a pop maybe up to that 48, 50,000 range.
Initially.
And then maybe a pullback at that point, kind of a like, okay, it's over, we got it, now what's the next thing? And we could talk about the halving. I mean, the halving's another thing down the line.
April?
That's coming in April, I believe.
Okay.
But right now, this is the big event, and then you'll see the narrative switch, though, right away. The bulls will try to switch it right over to the halving being the next catalyst for Bitcoin to continue up.
We can talk about that tomorrow, because I know there's so much. I have a few more questions. So do spot Bitcoin ETFs securely hold Bitcoin in a digital vault? And is that how it works? And then if so, do investors still need a digital wallet?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And basically what it comes down to is the ETFs should be backed by actual Bitcoin. So that's the positive. That gives an investor kind of the security of thinking, okay, well, I'm in an ETF, but it's backed by actual Bitcoin versus other methods, right? The futures that just track price, there's no real backing there. This is the kicker, right? Is that you're going to have some people that love the ETF that are like, okay, I can invest. I know I'm FDIC insured if someone does something with this. But then you have the other group of hardcore Bitcoiners that say you got to have it on a physical wallet. You got to take it offline. Those are the people that are going to be more distrusting of the government, which you could argue valid or not. But there's kind of both sides to the story. So the ETF gives you a nice benefit, but it also takes away that, the government could still come in and say, hey, you can't get your money out from the ETF or whatever they say if they confiscate that Bitcoin. And there's no real repercussions in that situation versus if you actually had real Bitcoin, you could have it on a separate drive, you could go somewhere else and so forth.
Okay, there are pros and cons, obviously,
pros and
to
cons,
everything.
Absolutely.
How do the ETF fees work? And what's the average cost? Because I keep seeing different numbers come out on that.
Yeah, they did come out with those, and they're varying. And there's as low as 0.24%, which is per year, which is really pretty good. I mean, as things go, you have to understand the ETF has to be run. It has employees and stuff like that. So there's got to be some sort of fee, but overall, very minimal fees. And the nice thing about it, too, is that the exchanges to make a trade usually charge you quite a bit of money, way higher than a stock trade. Stock trades these days are pretty much free, like on Robinhood, versus the ETF, because it's a stock trade, a lot of that's free. So investors that are okay with the ETF will be able to execute their orders for minimal cost versus on the exchanges. And I actually think this is one of the reasons why Coinbase has started to sell off a little bit, even though Bitcoin's going higher, is because this is competition for a Coinbase, right? And the other thing to keep an eye on too is MicroStrategies is down today too, and this is an interesting story. You know, here you have Bitcoin surging. You would assume MicroStrategy, which owns a ton of Bitcoin, would surge as well. But interestingly enough, it sold off today, right? And the thought process here is this has been basically the equivalent of an ETF. But now you're actually going to have ETFs. So there's money being pulled out of this because it'll probably go into the ETFs and people are selling that.
Okay.
So now MicroStrategy is going to be, yeah, they hold a lot of Bitcoin, but what's their actual value as a company versus kind of a proxy for an ETF that they have been.
All right. Outside of Bitcoin and this possible ETF approval, what else are you looking toward the rest of this week?
Yeah,
CPI?
the CPI on Thursday is going to be really key. I think that's the big news of the week. And again, the CPI number, if it comes in hot, how does that change the potential for the Fed to cut? And vice versa, if it's a little bit on the lighter side, meaning less inflation, the market's going to love that. The idea, I mean, I even think the jobs numbers, right? There's a mix of like, okay, we got the jobs numbers on Friday, but how many people, even though the number was stronger, was it a lot of part-time work? That's what it looked like. They revised last month down like 30%. So the jobs numbers weren't great, but they weren't horrible. The markets kind of were iffy on that. But really, it's the inflation. Inflation is the one thing that could keep the Fed from really being aggressive should we get into a downturn. So I think the inflation numbers continue to be so important.
All right, Gareth, thank you so much. We
Thank
appreciate it. And of course, you can catch Gareth navigate the charts ahead of the opening bell on his show, The Game Plan. It airs at 9 a.m. every day right here on the Verified Investing YouTube channel. Thank you so much for watching. That does it for Trading the Close on this Monday. I'm Toni Valliere. Go make it a great rest of the day.